So, guys, as you all know, yesterday, a certain politician decided to talk some smack about Native Americans, and I was just wondering if what you guys' thoughts were. That person being Sticky Rick Santorum. I think that he said that Native American culture had no footprints on American culture. Um, I think the big problem with this is that way of when you have a political leader preaching this to younger people and adults, they'll automatically think this way, thinking that whatever our ancestors left in the United States as contributing to American culture is non-existent or never happened, which is a big insult to the Native American code talkers. Um, Obviously, any food south of the U.S. border, um, and even the Constitution, which I think has relations to the Iroquois Confederacy. Correct me if
Or
I'm
they even mention natives in the Constitution, so it's in the most important document itself. Like they mention us. Um, but like one thing, just to throw something out, like real quick off the top of my head, right? All right, so Native American culture don't have an impact, hasn't formed anything with the U.S. Well, what about corn? Like all the cultures with corn and like civilizations.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that, we can't understate it. Corn is in everything. Like a lot of foods have corn syrup. Um, I mean popcorn, right? Like, there's just tons of food that comes from corn. A bunch of inventions too. So if it wasn't for that, but like a large portion of the world would starve because it's literally everywhere at this point. It's ubiquitous because Native Americans fostered this crop. It didn't just occur in nature. We made this crop. We built it, right? Through many generations and created it. So it's just ignorance. But that's just something off the top of my head that I just came up with.
Yeah, and you can also say that like in terms of food, like Thanksgiving meals, a lot of them are influenced by like Native American by like the first Thanksgiving, which was the Wampanoag indigenous nation teaching the pilgrims how to farm on like a land that was completely foreign to them. And a lot of the foods like pumpkin, turkey, um what was it? Corn are all grown from like are all grown by like native communities, and were like wouldn't be there unless these native communities taught them how to do that. So somehow Thanksgiving becomes some of the one of the or like a Thanksgiving dinner aside from this celebration of genocide becomes one of the most Native American like biggest Native American influences on everyday or like special American culture.
Yeah. And I feel that Sticky Ricky, thank you, New Almada, for telling me that nickname. Um, he should probably just give up corn and pretty much any vegetable that he knows, which likely originated in the U.S. from his mind. Um, Probably don't go to
He'd probably starve if he did that. But
don't go to any Mexican restaurant. Don't go to any South American restaurant for that matter.
don't go to freaking Cancun like Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Isn't it, I think it's ironic also that like I think maize was actually first geo-engineered by like native folks in Mexico. So not only is it indigenous, but it's also indigenous from Mexico. So that's like a double whammy on
Yeah, it's a double whammy, bro.
Santorum. Don't cross the border except for your food.
Yeah, except for your food, so we don't all starve to death, and the rest of the world too. Like,
Also,
Just the absurdity.
and that's why I wanted to make that point. It's like for ignorant people to think, oh, well, the corn just grew out of nowhere. It's like, no, it was genetically engineered by like Mesoamericans. They produced that it took hundreds or thousands of years to get it to where it is now. Like, that is a Native American invention.
true point.
Exactly.
And I hope he doesn't have any guinea pigs.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to personally come to his house and nationalize all his guinea pigs.
Yeah, or use number 0. Hope he doesn't like chocolate.
Oh, facts.
Yeah, chocolate. I mean, I hope he can stop being like using those little racist sayings, if Native Americans culture hasn't had an impact, like the whole lowest man on the totem pole, everybody says that shit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
There's like a yeah, you want to go?
oh no, you go, please.
Yeah, there's a whole book that like describes how all the cultures in the Americas, but a lot of them in the US was influenced by like indigenous culture. It's called Indian Giver. I believe it's Indian Giver, how the Indians of the Americas transformed the world. So not only did indigenous peoples influence US culture, but they without the new world, there wouldn't be the world we have now. Hell, even like tomatoes, which like are the basic like are tantamount for most of are the basic most basic ingredient in like Italian cooking and even like Indian cooking, like Indian from India, comes from what was it? Comes from the tomatoes that were grown in the Americas. So most of like the delicious dishes that we have like now like you wouldn't have them unless indigenous people's farming and agriculture techniques spread around the world.
Well, at one point I was going to make, I read this book called An Indigenous People's History of the U.S. by Dunbar Ortiz. Excellent book. But the indigenous people, like, they had trails, they had roads because they had trade. Like, this land here in the continental U.S. or for anywhere, for that matter, wasn't untamed like wilderness. Like, it was tamed by the indigenous peoples, right? Had it not been for that, like Dunbar Ortiz argues that the settlers, had they indeed landed on a continent that had no humans on it, right? Just complete wilderness, they would have died. There's no way they could have tamed it in that short amount of time period. It would have been too savage for them. So it's like, but no, the Native Americans had, like, they took care of this land, and then the Europeans just came in and just took it from them. Basically, it's like walking into a castle, right? And you just take control of the castle. All the building was already done for you, right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
I have the exact quote that Rick Santorum made at that dinner with the uh I believe it's like a conservative nonprofit or something of the sort. But this is what he said to them. They said they in reference to like the colonizers or the colonists, they set up a country that was based on Judeo-Christian principles. We birthed a nation from nothing. I mean, there was nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, there isn't much Native American culture in American culture. One, he needs a script writer because the man is stuttering left and right. And second, is just if you most of the modern metropolitan, like most of the modern avenues that you see in like New York come from the Lenape people. Like Broadway in Manhattan was an old Lenape trail that was a major vein on the island for trade and for leaving for like getting in and out of the out of like Manhattan Island. So even modern architecture and city planning has to worked around the first settlements by indigenous peoples. Like you don't have New York City, you don't have Broadway if not for the Lenape people. And let's remember that the Lenape people are not is the name for the people who quote sold Manhattan. When I was in school in New York, when I was in elementary school, they would only mention the Lenape people as the Indians that sold New York. They didn't even have the pleasure of the Board of Education didn't even have the pleasure of or the dignity to say the name of the indigenous peoples of this land.
Yeah, it is a pretty big disgrace, and the fact that it comes from our political leaders, but not a huge surprise. That's not the first time that's happened, and it probably won't be the last. But I think that the videos that we put out correcting these politicians with their unintelligent wording, we can make some progress. I think that the big issue is that Dirty Rick, um, preaches that Native Americans. Oh, and I think this is also from looking at it from other perspective, like certain historians, and even an issue with the American education system is that they say Native Americans can only be primitive people that lived in teepees. They didn't really contribute much to American society, and that's it. You know, And I think that Rick Senatorum's wording is very, very colonial, and it further erases our ancestral contribution to the United States. And that being said, if Americans are so much, a lot of Americans praise, Christopher Columbus as being a part of American culture, even though he didn't find the United States, then they should also praise the natives that helped Columbus and his conquistador gang, or Spanish gang, come to this Cuba, the Dominican Republic, the Caribbean islands at the time. I mean, if you're going to acknowledge that Columbus is a part of American culture, acknowledge the Native Americans that helped him get there before they were fooled and killed off, of course.
There's such a weird history with Rick Santorum and Columbus. Like, there's this funny thing where back in 1991, Rick Santorum, when he was in the Senate, actually co-sponsored a bill called HJ Res 152, in which he and like a couple of other like senators and House representatives made Columbus an honorary citizen of the United States.
There.
They made a dead guy from Spain who murdered, who almost exterminated the Taino peoples across the Caribbean, a what was it? A citizen of the U.S. of territory, a part of the Americas he had never stepped foot on. But the irony is that, like, not only is like Rick Santorum is like known for being like a smarmy, like, uh, like, oh, I'm just so much better than you, like Christian. But the irony is that like Columbus's crew was like notoriously, like, they notoriously mocked Christianity and Jesus. And this was related by like Bartolome de las Casas, who was a not only a priest, he was a priest at the time, but I think he was part of some of the first voyages that Columbus made to the Caribbean, and before he had seen the light of how violent the colonial regime in the Caribbean was, he actually owned native slaves on the plantations in the Caribbean. But he wrote this from his firsthand experience. The, in his the brief description of the destruction of the Indies. They erected giblets, large but low made, so that their feet almost reached the ground, every one of which was ordered as to bear 13 persons in honor and reverence, as they said blasphemously, of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles, under which they made a fire to burn them to ashes while hanging on them. Literally, so to translate the quote into like modern English, they basically made fire pits and hung 13 Tainos, what was it, over the fire, and his crew would say, look, it's Jesus and his 12 apostles, and they started laughing and burning them basically at the stake. The crew was making fun of both the last supper and of like Jesus and the apostles, and somehow this man is not only representative of his own Christian values, but of any values that like he purports to believe of the Americas, of the US. Like, his whole idea is that the US was founded on democracy and like the wiseness of like the founding fathers. But like, you can't even do like a 5-minute like Google search and like see this quote. It took me 5 minutes to find this.
That pretty much brings me to conclusion that Rick hates natives.
I don't doubt you there, bro.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
I'm sure. Like, I'm not super familiar, but I'm gonna assume that he's also gonna be the type that is like, oh, stop the brown savages from crossing the border. So yeah, that only foments that point.
certainly. I'm sure
Isn't
that
it weird how conservatives have like were so scared of like Aztlan and like the Reconquista and like, oh, they're gonna come after us, and most Chicanos were like, yo, we just want to barbecue and just chill with like, oh, chill here in peace. Like, we don't want to just get deported. That's all.
yeah,
God, man.
exactly. It's a strange world, but hopefully he apologizes, or CNN, gives him the boot.
But the worst part is like there's so many conservatives who think the same way. Like, they're so hypocritical. They'll honor Christopher Columbus, but they won't read any accounts, or when they're challenged on it, they'll just feign ignorance and just like just like say and not say a word. And I mean, like, in me personally, I don't think you can call yourself a Christian if you like care about Columbus. Like, or if you do, you're being very hypocritical with unreconcilable facts. If anything, you should at least care to read, if not honor Bartolome de las Casas, even though in my personal view he's still problematic.
Yeah.
Agreed. He did kind of make it easier for Africans to be, enslaved in the Americas. He wanted to stop indigenous, slavery, native slavery, but wanted as many Africans as possible to replace it. So
Yeah,
very controversial figure indeed. Uh,
exactly. But like, at least in terms of his policies against the Spanish, like, yeah, Bartolome de las Casas was like the best quote progressive that the Spanish had. But like, even Rick Santorum couldn't ever acknowledge something like that.
of course
But
not.
yeah, but people who we should acknowledge though are the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy.
Hmm.
They actually were some of the people who founded um, modern American democracy. And there's actually another congressional bill, because when I'm not when I'm not actually doing writing, I'm like looking up congressional bills for no reason. Here in like 1988, the U.S. Senate passed law H. Con. Res. 331, which formally recognized that the U.S. Constitution was founded on, quote, Iroquois democracy, end quote. The founding fathers greatly admired the concept of the Iroquois Confederacy. If there, this was 4 years before Rick Santorum had actually, or 3 years before Rick Santorum had like co-sponsored the other bill, honoring Columbus. So either he's missing some screws, like in terms of like how he's dealing with the Senate, or like he's feigning ignorance just so he can get his own narrative across.
Yeah. Either he's stupid or he's just dishonest. It's one or the other. Both of which aren't really good qualities to have.
Exactly. But like, think about this, like the founding fathers, they had other examples. They had like the Greeks and the Romans and other like European republics. But like, there's so many white supremacists whose heads would explode if they were like, if they had to acknowledge, oh yeah, the founding fathers were just as influenced by Indian savages in the north as they were by the Greeks and the Romans.
Yep.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that even in the U.S. right now, I think a lot of Americans don't even view people of Greek descent as being, Anglo white American. Um, I know a lot of people that don't. And I think even previously, what was it? In the 1950s or 1940s, I know the Irish and the Italians weren't even considered to be white American. I wouldn't be surprised if Greeks were also in the same boat.
Yeah, and that's the problem about like whiteness in America and like the US. It's always shifting. And that's the thing that a lot of people miss when they talk about what does it mean to be white in the US. It's like the debate is that, oh, it's shifted throughout different points in history. Before World War II, Jews weren't considered white. They were considered they were considered other, or they were considered non-white, just like the Roma people are,
Mhm.
or like in the same way, like more so than the Italians and Greeks and the Irish. But like, even before, even during the 1800s, the Irish were at the bottom rung of year of like English society, because they were colonized by the British. And actually, the Irish, during the potato famine, I believe received like 85 or so, like a couple dozen dollars from I believe the Cherokee Nation, because the Cherokee had heard that the Irish were starving, and as an act of goodwill, the Cherokee Nation had rounded up, or is it the Choctaw Nation? Can someone look that up real quick? Because there was an indigenous nation from like the South had sent that money to the Irish people so that they would be able to buy some. some potatoes, or be able to just survive during the famine.
Yeah, it was the Choctaws.
It was a
Choctaws.
Choctaw, yeah.
Yeah.
They sent the money just so that the Irish could survive, and it's amazing how much not only were indigenous peoples like influencing U.S. society and like a major part of like the anxiety that like white people had here, but they were involved in international affairs and involved in humanitarian and diplomatic missions, even a few years after they were put on reservations. Like you gotta,
Okay. Here, okay. I just Googled this real quick.
yeah.
10 foods native to the Americas. So nobody else in the world would have this and they would starve probably, right?
Yeah.
Squash, corn, which we went over, avocados, peppers, beans, tomatoes, tomatillos, amaranth, and then potatoes, bro. What did the freaking Irish eat? Potatoes.
Exactly.
So it's like, so it's like without the, like when you talk about native culture, like had nothing to do with the US at all. It's like this country would literally be starving if it wasn't for all these foods. Like these are mass produced all over the world foods. They feed everybody. Like to say it's just ignorant to say all this stupid shit.
Exactly. And Santorum represents he's a WASP. I believe he's a WASP. He's like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant whose family probably was here on like some of the first boats to to like native lands in the what is now the US. But like I would love to see more solidarity with other white folks who have historically been oppressed within a European context, like the Irish.
Yeah.
Because they have like certain Spanish groups like the Catalans, because they were colonized by their own by like they were colonized first before their colonizing countries colonized the Americas, like Spain to Catalan, or like the Irish by the English. And I
Yeah.
think there's so many possibilities there that and it's just sad because they buy like these folks, because they've assimilated a lot, they'll buy into Rick Santorum's comments, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm white, like there's nothing like yeah, these Indians, they're savages, when like when like the Choctaw Nation not only gave humanitarian aid to the Irish, but also literally invented the food that like is a staple not only in Irish culture but in like world culture. Like, bro, where is Russia without potatoes? Or bro, where is Japan without the sweet potato?
Yeah.
I agree. But, with these videos, I hope that, one day maybe Rick will watch and change his ways. Maybe, realize that what he said was pretty foolish. And I hope that by this video, we can educate some other people who maybe weren't aware of the large contributions we made. So,
Yep. And one last thing, I think the hashtag that's going around is hashtag fire Rick. So if people want to create a firestorm against him, for CNN to either fire him or for him to like just lose notoriety altogether, I think hashtag fire Rick is the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad option either. I mean, it's really offensive stuff.
It really is.
agree.
And it's just, and I think we can all agree that it is settler colonial rhetoric at a time when white supremacy is at an all-time high.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, being in the internet, doing what we do with these videos, white supremacy is everywhere. I swear, everywhere.
Exactly.
You heard it here first, folks. Fire Rick.
To the haters, we hate you too.
And also, don't forget to check out New Almada's Instagram.
We're leaking it.
Yes, we're gonna link it in the description. So y'all take care and have a good night.
Peace.